In the heart of an ancient European palace, where chandeliers still whispered secrets from centuries past and the marble floors echoed with the quiet grace of history, the wedding of Duke Alaric Thorne and Lady Evelyne Elowin unfolded like a dream sculpted in gold and ivory. The soft hush of the afternoon light poured in through floor-to-ceiling arched windows, casting a golden veil over the grand ballroom as if the heavens themselves had blessed the moment. The scent of blooming gardenias and white roses lingered. In the air, woven with the faintest trace of rain-kissed stone from the early morning drizzle that had since given way to a glowing sun. Every detail of the room had been curated with such intention that time itself felt paused. Velvet curtains framed the windows like royal robes, while the gilded ceiling shimmered like a celestial dome. Beneath it stood Alaric, statuesque and poised, clad in a perfectly tailored black suit that clung to his broad shoulders and defined his regal form. His flaxen hair was swept back neatly, the edge of his jaw sharp as a sword, his ocean blue eyes deep with emotion, and yet focused, every breath he took laced with awe and devotion as he watched Evelyne take her final step toward him. She was a vision carved from moonlight and elegance, walking slowly under the vaulted arches in a gown that seemed to carry the spirit of every bride who had ever dared to love fiercely. Her white dress clung delicately to her slender figure, intricate lace stitched by hand dancing across the silk like whispers of blessings. A cathedral-length veil trailed behind her like mist, and atop her chestnut hair rested a diamond tiara that had belonged to queens before her, shining like a constellation made just for her. Her skin glowed with a porcelain softness, her soft pink lips trembling with the ache of joy, and her pale blue eyes shimmering like frost touched by sunrise. There was a serenity in her expression, the kind that only came from a woman who had weathered heartbreak and found her harbor in a man who never stopped waiting. Her earrings, long, elegant, delicate as snowflakes, caught the light with every step, like tiny constellations orbiting her presence. Evelyne wasn't just walking toward a man. She was walking into a lifetime and every click of her heel a pawn. The marble felt like a heartbeat spoken into eternity. Guests watched in silence, overcome by the sacredness of the moment. Diplomats, monarchs, nobles, and old poets who had forgotten how to weep. Some clutched white handkerchiefs embroidered in family crests, while others simply stared, as if afraid to blink and miss the magic. The string quartet played a gentle sonata in the background, but it was not louder than the unspoken promises swelling between bride and groom. Alaric stepped forward, unable to contain the reverence in his gaze. He reached for her hands, small, delicate, trembling, and held them as though they were relics from another world. He whispered her name, not loudly, but with a weight that made it feel sacred, Evelyne. And she, in return, whispered his like a vow, Alaric. No priest had spoken yet, no legal bond had been signed, but they were already married in spirit. Time circled around them like a spell, as if the palace, the light, the air, all of it existed solely for this union. The officiant's voice eventually rose above the quiet, but even his words felt suspended in a sacred hush. As he began the rites, reciting lines older than the throne itself, Evelyne and Alaric never broke eye contact. The world around them dissolved into blur and color. They had met not in ease, but through fire during the time of political unrest when Evelyne's father had been exiled for treason he did not commit. It was Alaric who believed in her family's innocence, Alaric who crossed enemy borders in disguise, who found her hiding in a forgotten countryside abbey, her hands raw from working the earth to survive, her spirit dimmed but never broken. He knelt at her side, gave her his name to shield her, and promised her the throne not as a gift, but as her rightful place. Their love had bloomed through sacrifice, not comfort. They did not come together from vanity or arrangement, but from a bond forged in courage and honor. and nurtured by a passion that refused to die even when the world tried to silence it. As the final vows were exchanged, the palace trembled with applause, but Evelyne heard only the thundering rhythm of her own heart as Alaric slid the delicate band of white gold and diamonds onto her slender finger. He looked at her not as a man looks at a queen, but as a soul looks at the only star in his night sky. When she placed the ring upon his hand, her touch lingered, soft but grounding, as if anchoring him to the promise of forever. The kiss that followed was not dramatic. It was gentle, sealed with reverence. Lips brushed softly like two clouds, meeting after 1,000 miles of drifting, and the crowd sighed, for in that kiss was every poem never written, every prayer ever whispered into the night by lovers waiting across seas. The room seemed to glow brighter when they pulled apart, not because of the chandeliers, but because they had become the light themselves. Every eye in the room glistened with tears, and in the quiet that followed, there was only one truth left: they were home. After the ceremony, they stepped out onto the grand palace balcony, where doves flew into the warm afternoon sky and bells rang across the city. Below, thousands had gathered to witness the union. Children tossed petals, trumpets sang, and an orchestra played the national hymn of the kingdom. Yet even amidst the noise, Alaric leaned toward Evelyne and whispered something only she could hear. She laughed, soft and radiant, her crown catching the sun like it was alive. Her cheeks flushed not just with beauty, but with happiness that came from being completely seen, completely loved. They waved to their people, but their hands never separated. Inside the palace, the great hall had been transformed into a celebration of royal splendor. Crystal goblets shimmered, golden chandeliers glowed like stars, and long tables overflowed with delicacies, but Alaric and Evelyne only cared for each other. They moved through the crowd as one, her hand always on his chest, his hand always at her waist. Their first dance was not rehearsed, not choreographed. It began as a soft sway in the center of the ballroom, and as the orchestra played a tender waltz, Evelyne's dress twirled like a sea of lace around her, and Alaric led her with the ease of a man who had memorized her every movement. Guests encircled them, silent again, watching not a performance but a love story unfold in real time. The way he looked at her, intense, unwavering, like a sailor finally home from a long voyage, was something that couldn't be replicated. The sailor finally home from a long voyage was something that couldn't be replicated. Way she held him, soft, trusting, as though the war was finally over, was something eternal. When the music ended, the applause thundered, but they were unaware of it. They only saw each other. As the evening turned into night, lanterns were lit across the palace gardens, and guests spilled out into the courtyards for wine and stories, laughter and new beginnings. Evelyne stood beneath a canopy of stars, the silk of her veil fluttering in the gentle breeze, her head on Alaric's shoulder as he spoke softly about their future, about the lands they would visit, the peace they would build, the children they hoped for. She listened with closed eyes, soaking in the warmth of his voice like it was the sun itself. He kissed the top of her head, held her closer, and whispered, "This is only the beginning." She nodded, because deep within, she knew their story was destined to be written in every language of love. In that palace of dreams, under the gaze of ancestors and gods, amidst gold and silk, amidst power and ceremony, what remained most powerful was not the crown on her head or the title beside his name, but the quiet, unshakable truth that they had chosen each other. Not for duty, not for legacy, but for the kind of love that burns quietly and forever. And in that moment, they were not just a duke and a duchess, not just a husband and a wife. They were a promise, a prayer answered, a beginning spun from threads of stardust and fate. That night, long after the guests had gone and the palace had fallen silent, Alaric and Evelyne stood alone beneath the moonlight in the royal garden. Fireflies danced around them like blessings from the stars. Evelyne rested her head on Alaric's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Promise me we'll never lose this," she whispered. He kissed her forehead and replied, "Not even time can take this from us." In that stillness, their fingers intertwined, no longer just bound by vows, but by something deeper, a love that had survived war, doubt, and now belonged only to forever. Asterisk.